How did the history of the Americas begin? Throughout human history, few regions evoke as much wonder and mystery as the Americas. As one of the last major landmasses to be settled by humans, the Americas became home to diverse cultures and civilizations. Join us in this video to explore the origins of the first humans to reach these abundant continents at the edge of the known world. From their treacherous journeys across the icy wastelands of Siberia and Canada to encountering formidable Ice Age predators such as saber-toothed cats and giant short-faced bears. The Ice Age immigrants. Humans have wandered the planet for hundreds of thousands of years, following the seasons in search of sustenance and warmth, hoping to prolong the existence of their species. Our ancient ancestors faced unimaginable hardships, adapting to drastic environmental changes that shaped human evolution. Among all migration stories, the settlement of the Americas remains one of the most debated and intriguing subjects in archaeology. If we look to Africa and Europe, anthropologists propose humans ventured throughout the landscape as early as 300,000 years ago, pointing to the discovery of the Jebel Irhoud remains in Morocco as credible evidence. But when we turn our attention back to the Americas, the archaeological record appears far younger in essence, and to many, the idea of when humans first arrived on the continent continues to invoke a wide range of opinions. To truly understand the lengthy history of the Americas, we must first venture back to the Pleistocene epoch. This geological epoch began around 2.6 million years ago and lasted until approximately 11,700 years ago. It's characterized by long cycles of glacial and interglacial periods, and the last of these great ice ages is known as the last glacial maximum. This period is of particular interest to researchers and archaeologists over the past century in their quest to find the first Americans. The last glacial maximum, or LGM for short, began as early as 25,000 years ago and lasted for several thousand years. Widely considered to be the coldest part of the last ice age, this era saw massive ice sheets covering much of North America, dramatically shaping the landscape and migration patterns. The Laurentide ice sheet covered most of Canada and the northern United States under ice layers up to 2.5 miles thick. Regions such as British Columbia, Alaska, Montana, New England, and parts of Idaho and Washington lay frozen beneath this vast glacial expanse. South America didn't escape the wrath of the Pleistocene, experiencing its fair share of these freezing conditions. The Patagonian ice sheet covered the southern third of Chile and parts of Argentina, and almost wholly submerged the Patagonian Andes. The extensive sheet was about 2,000 kilometers long from north to south. Distinct animals roamed the Americas during this bygone era, ranging from saber-toothed cats to woolly mammoths and even enormous ground sloths that make their modern tree-hugging cousins appear as nothing more than babies. At the end of the last glacial maximum, Earth experienced a drastic drop in sea levels, exposing large sections of the world's continental shelves. This allowed not only land animals, but also humans to cross the so-called Bering land bridge that connected North America and Siberia. This narrow opening led the first humans to journey from Eurasia to the Americas, becoming the seeds that would soon blossom into civilization in the West. For decades, scholars widely accepted that humans first arrived in North America around 16,000 years ago via the Bering Land Bridge. However, new discoveries suggest that human migration to the Americas may have begun much earlier, possibly as early as 23,000 or even 30,000 years ago, though these claims remain debated. During this time, the Bering Strait was flooded as ice sheets began melting in the northern hemisphere, submerging it beneath the freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The exact date when humans reached the Americas using this primordial bridge has been widely debated over the past few decades, with some suggesting evidence points towards humans migrating to the continent as early as 23,000 years ago. While the Bering land bridge theory remains widely supported by archaeologists and geneticists, recent discoveries have suggested that earlier human presence in the Americas may have also occurred through alternative migration routes. The exact timing and pathways of these migrations remain areas of active research and debate. A study led by Oxford University professor Tom Hyam proposed that evidence from multiple sites suggests human presence in the Americas may date back as far as 30,000 years ago. While this remains debated, it has encouraged further research into the complexities of early human migration. In their report, they meticulously detailed investigations conducted at over 40 sites using cutting-edge scientific techniques and went on to drop a bombshell by proposing these ancient migrants didn't cross the Bering land bridge as it was still impenetrable at this time. Instead, they claim the oldest Eurasians to reach America came by way of boats. Dr. Lorena Becerra Valdivia, who worked alongside Hyam, shed light on their discovery and its implications. Stating, "The peopling of the Americas was a complex and dynamic process. What is clear is that humans were present in the continent well before previously accepted dates. But it was only around 14,700 years ago that these people became more highly visible in the archaeological record, likely due to an increase in population." Despite the magnitude of the discovery and what it would mean for the timeline of humans in the Americas, numerous scientists were quick to push back against the new theories. Many argued that the findings of the Oxford-based researchers are inconclusive and that more work is required before they can say with certainty when humans arrived in the Americas. But this hasn't been the only fascinating discovery of its kind in recent decades. Another site that aims to push back the human presence on the continents is located several thousands of kilometers to the south at Chiquihuite Cave, a high-altitude rock shelter in central Mexico. Here, researchers discovered a rich cache of items, including 2,000 stone tools, suggesting the cave was inhabited by people around 33,000 years ago. Another debated site is the Topper excavation site in South Carolina, where archaeologist Dr. Albert Goodyear has suggested that some artifacts may date as far back as 50,000 years. However, this claim remains controversial, with many scholars questioning whether the artifacts show clear evidence of human modification. The dating of these artifacts has been met with some criticism, with some suggesting the timeline proposed is over-exaggerated. But as archaeologists continue to study sites of interest, researchers are slowly being forced to reckon with the idea that humans may have arrived in the Americas thousands of years before initially thought. As these theories are relatively new, critics and skeptics propose a vast deal more evidence is required before we can get a definite answer on when the earliest humans settled in America. Nonetheless, archaeologists and anthropologists generally agree on one thing. By the end of the last glacial maximum around 11,700 years ago, the populating of the continents was well underway, and the ancestors of today's Native Americans had begun to establish thriving cultures that would spread across the entirety of the Americas. The Clovis culture. In the wintry shadows that engulfed the last glacial maximum, a group of enigmatic Eurasians arrived in the Americas that would go on to change the course of history. These nomadic hunters, known as the Clovis people, ventured across the Bering land bridge, facing unimaginable obstacles on their way. From fighting against a vicious and tall extinct species of mammal known as short-faced bears to enduring the crippling weather that likely left many of their ancestors freezing to death, they persevered the long journey and made it to the promised land beyond the ice. The Clovis culture was long considered the first human group to settle the Americas. However, new archaeological discoveries suggest that earlier populations may have arrived before them, challenging the long-held Clovis first theory. Nonetheless, they remain the oldest ancient American group about which we know a considerable deal. The Clovis themselves were characterized by a distinct type of stone tool utilized in hunting. The first signs of their presence in the Americas were discovered by construction workers who had unearthed a cache of large animal bones in eastern New Mexico in 1932. The news eventually reached Edgar B. Howard, who at the time was working as an archaeology research associate at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Almost immediately, he dropped what he was doing and rushed to Clovis, New Mexico, to persuade the landowners to let him excavate the site. By the following summer, he had uncovered what he called at the time matted masses of bones of mammoths and an unprecedented number of slender spear points made of various stones, known to modern archaeologists as Clovis points. The Clovis parts are distinctive, meticulously chipped from obsidian, jasper, chert, and other fine brittle stones. Extending from the base towards the tips are shallow, concave grooves called flutes that may have helped the points be inserted into spear shafts. Generally, the stone implements are around 4 inches long and 1/3 of an inch thick. Upon physical inspection, archaeologists denounce they were sleek and beautifully made by the hands of experienced craftsmen. After discovering Clovis points in New Mexico, Howard and others began to look for traces of similar stone tools in artifacts found in Siberia, hoping to discover the origin of the first Americans. However, they came up empty-handed, suggesting that the Clovis points were an American invention and perhaps the very first one of its kind. To date, over 10,000 of the Clovis points have been discovered at more than 1,500 locations throughout most of North America. They have unearthed across a broad swath of land stretching from Florida to Montana and Pennsylvania to Washington. Yet despite their overwhelming presence, archaeologists have suggested the Clovis culture lasted for just a few centuries. They appear to have materialized suddenly by archaeological standards and spread fast before disappearing from the archaeological record. The oldest securely dated points, discovered in Texas, are around 13,500 years old. Most of their distinctive hunting implements were found wedged between the ribs of large extinct mammals, including mastodons and mammoths. No doubt, when these people arrived in the Americas, they followed in the footsteps of large animals migrating to new lands. These early Eurasians hunted woolly mammoths and steppe bison and eventually established a culture that would go on to spread across the 2 American continents. In the past, researchers proposed the Clovis people had a particular reverence for preying on the largest mammals that roamed the Americas. But in reality, the culture mainly depended on foraging for plants, hunting much smaller mammals, and likely making use of the bountiful rivers to catch fish. Their Stone Age tool belt consisted of scrapers, blades, drills, and needles, all of which they used to lead the way for culture in the Americas to blossom. The clear presence of the Clovis in North America is undeniable, being linked across the continent by the way of their unique stone points. However, a question that perplexed many researchers for decades was the extent to which the Clovis people had spread into South America. Some researchers attempted to use the discovery of fishtail stone points as clear evidence, suggesting they were remarkably similar to those produced by the Clovis. Back in 2018, this dilemma was finally solved by Howard Hughes medical investigator David Reich and his colleague, who published a report on November 8, 2018 in the prestigious journal Cell. As a renowned team of researchers who garnered international fame for their work showcasing that Neanderthals interbred with our ancestors, they compared ancient peoples' genes from sites in Central and South America to genes from a Clovis-linked individual who lived in today's Montana between 12,700 and 12,900 years ago. They discovered a clear match between the Montana individual's genes and the 3 oldest genetic samples in the new study, which came from Chile, Brazil, and Belize. Their groundbreaking study provided the archaeological work with credible evidence to suggest that migrations of people who spread the Clovis culture in North America did, in fact, have an effect farther south and likely were the progenitors of the so-called fishtail culture. Though widespread, the Clovis culture lasted only a few centuries before fading from the archaeological record. Rather than disappearing entirely, it is likely that Clovis groups adapted to changing environments, evolving into new regional cultures. As Clovis people settled into different ecological zones, the culture split into distinctive groups, each adapting to its own individual environment. In reality, the end of Clovis marked the beginning of the enormous social, cultural, and linguistic diversity, one that would pave the way for civilization in the Americas over the next 10,000 years. Of the brief fluorescence of Clovis, only their unmistakable stone tools remained. These were the last physical traces of America's first and most extensive cultural imperium. The cultures that rose from the ashes of the Clovis people. As the sun sets on the Pleistocene, a new era emerges from beneath the tightly packed layers of ice that once covered the continent. Armed with innovative stone tools and backed by fire, ancient humans embarked on a journey that would soon take them to all corners of the American continents, ushering in a period of evolution that would, in time, define this part of the world. The Clovis people vanished from the archaeological record around 12,900 years ago. For some time, researchers surmise this extensive group of pioneers may have succumbed to drastic changes in the climate, leading to their eventual extinction. However, it has become apparent that this wasn't the case. Instead, they simply evolved with the times and slowly transitioned into several other distinct cultures, many of which would go on to have an everlasting effect on the landscape. You see, at the same time as the disappearance of Clovis points, the American continents were going through a transition of their own. As the last glacial maximum was coming to an end, an unexpected cold snap occurred 12,900 years ago, plunging North America into one of the coldest periods of the entire Ice Age. Unfortunately, this devastated many of the largest megafauna living in the Americas, such as woolly mammoths and mastodons, many of which were driven to extinction. Of course, other factors may have played a minor role in their demise, including the role of humans and the breakdown of food webs. With the dwindling number of large animals roaming the American landscape, a vital source of sustenance for the Clovis people was lost. Undoubtedly, this forced them to seek out new lands and invent new technologies to hunt smaller animals and game, and eventually, they morphed into small, distinct cultures. Researchers have compared several regional point styles or distinct stone implements that appear to have evolved from the older Clovis culture. This includes the Folsom tradition, located in central North America, the Cumberland culture, found in middle and southern parts of North America, the Sewanee and Simpson points, respectively unearthed in the southeast, and the Gainey points, located around the enchanting banks of the Great Lakes region. Of these, Folsom was the largest and most prominent, leaving behind a plethora of stone points that tell the story of this post-Clovis people. Their fluted projectiles have been discovered over a vast distance along the western high plains stretching from Canada to Mexico. Many Folsom points have been unearthed in pristine condition, showcasing the level of craftsmanship these early Americans possessed. They are long and slender, and generally range from 2 to 3 inches long, with some examples exceeding 3 inches. The Folsom is still much smaller in weight and size than most Clovis points when in unaltered condition. The Folsom people specialized in hunting giant bison, a now extinct species, evidenced by the large concentration of their points found in association with bison bones. Despite the clear distinction between the Folsom people and the other cultures that arose following the disappearance of the Clovis people, anthropologists were confident they were related ancestrally. Modern historians classify the Clovis culture and its predecessors as Paleo-Indians. However, whether these groups share a single ancestral origin remained uncertain until a pivotal 2014 study in the journal Nature, which analyzed ancient DNA to trace their genetic lineage. A team of scientists under the command of lead author Eske Willerslev from the University of Copenhagen sequenced the complete genome of a male infant unearthed in western Montana around 12,600 years ago. Discovered at the Anzik burial site, the area has gained prominence as a Clovis treasure trove. According to the study, here, approximately 100 stone tools and 15 osseous tool fragments that are technologically consistent with the artifacts of the Clovis complex were found in direct association with the partial fragmentary remains of an infant child. After meticulously analyzing the results of their testing, the researchers were able to determine the child belongs to a population from which many contemporary Native Americans descended and is closely related to all indigenous American populations. In fact, some 80% of all present-day Native American populations on the two American continents are direct descendants of the Clovis boys' family. The remaining 20% are still more closely related to the Clovis family than any other group on Earth. In short, it appears as if the researchers had discovered credible evidence to suggest the Clovis people and the cultures that superseded it, including the Folsom, are the ancestors of the vast majority of Native Americans found across the Americas today. But that wasn't the only fascinating part of the study. In addition, it sheds light on the migration that led these early trailblazers from Eurasia to their new home. According to the work of the accredited team of researchers, the genome of the child suggests his ancestors migrated from Siberia into North America over 32,000 years ago. This places the oldest migration of humans to the continents at 20,000 years before the Clovis culture even appeared in the archaeological record. The team also proposed that Native American ancestors coming from Siberia split into two groups. One comprises ancestors of Native Americans presently living in Canada, whereas the other, represented by the Clovis boy, is the ancestor of virtually all Native Americans in South America and Mexico. The Paleo-Indian period roughly extends from 16,000 years ago to around 8,000 years ago. As researchers continue to conduct in-depth studies throughout the continents, they have gained incredible insight into the daily lives of Paleo-Indians. Studying the sites and distinct artifacts has allowed them to understand their daily lives. These early Americans utilized a plethora of tools ranging from microblades for butchering and hide processing to axes, points, and even animal bones turned into needles. However, some of the most significant advancements have come about by studying the beautiful rock art left behind by migrating Paleo-Indians in regions across Latin America, such as the Serranía de la Lindosa in Colombia. The paintings there are thought to be 12,800 years old, coinciding with the end of the last ice age. A distinctive assortment of depictions were carefully drawn onto the walls in red ochre, leaving behind the legacies of these ancient peoples. Extinct animals, including native horses and ground sloths, make up part of the fresco, accompanied by cryptic symbols and sigils, likely associated with religious and spiritual traditions. While many of these paintings may have been mere creative expressions, experts summarize that they could have also been used as educational tools to teach the younger generations about different species of animals and plants. Much of the cave art at Serrania de la Lindosa and those in other parts of South America contain symbolic art depicting the spiritual world. Beautifully explained by Francisco Javier Aceituno, an archaeologist at the University of Antioquia, Colombia, as photographs of the past, the researcher is certain we can learn a great deal about the earliest Americans by studying these thought-invoking paintings. Some form of ancestry spirituality is clearly evident in Paleo-American art. Speaking on the sprawling canvas at Serrania de la Lindosa, Aceituno said there are scenes of dancing rituals or shamanic rites. With these spiritual scenes, people were trying to domesticate the natural world by controlling the forces of nature. Through the meticulous study of art, researchers have come to better understand the complexity of America's first humans. They were not just simple hunter-gatherers, but innovative humans who sought to create a new life in a distant land for the sake of their people. Along with their knowledge of survival, they brought their spiritual beliefs and religious customs to the New World, evolving each of these aspects of culture as they ventured throughout the continents. As they began to settle in regions throughout the continents, researchers have started to suspect that the Paleo-Indians may have had an unprecedented effect on biodiversity and plant life during an era of profound climatic activity. Rock art found in parts of the Amazon hints that humans were managing plant species about 9,000 years ago. That could explain the persistence of valuable plants in the Amazon now. An extraordinary number of distinct plants utilized for food and medicine can be found throughout the bountiful jungle. Many medicines and drugs originate from the Amazon, earning it the nickname the world's largest medicine cabinet. Aceituno goes on to explain that the Paleo-Indians achieved a balance in the management of natural resources. Plants and animals were more than food. They were also seen as living beings to be respected. The people used the preservation principle. I cannot extinguish my resources, my food. The work of researchers such as Aceituno has been pivotal in increasing our understanding of Paleo-Indians and just how complex their society truly was. With the advancements of genealogy, we have learned a great deal about the ancestral origins of these early Americans and their intricate web of connections that spread throughout the landscape. But if you thought that this solved the story of humans in the Americas, you'd be wrong. As in the wake of the various innovative studies, further mysteries centered on genealogy began to arise deep in the South. Going back to the study of Reich, who showcased a link between the Clovis people and the fishtail culture of South America, their work may have opened up one door, but it left them banging at another without answers. Reich and his team analyzed the remains of at least 49 individuals who lived around 11,000 years ago. As mentioned earlier in the video, they found credible evidence to suggest these individuals, unearthed in parts of Brazil, Chile, and Belize, were ancestrally related to the Clovis people of North America. Their work surmised the dispersal of the fishtail culture, named after a specific stone implement that shared characteristics similar to the Clovis point, was the work of a group from a shared lineage. However, as Reich and his team continued to analyze the remains of more individuals, they stumbled upon a finding that shocked the archaeological community to its core. They found evidence to suggest that around 9,000 years ago in Central and South America, the Clovis culture-associated people vanished and were replaced by a different genetic lineage. To the surprise of the researchers, they meticulously examined the data to ensure the authenticity of the results. They later concluded that the vast majority of people who lived across a broad area stretching from Patagonia to Belize from 9,000 to 3,000 years ago are genetically distinct from the Clovis culture's associated ancestors and that of their successors. So, who were these peculiar South Americans? Well, as of yet, this enigma has yet to be answered, and the group's true identity and origin continue to evade researchers, meaning the mysteries of the Americas are yet to reveal themselves in their totality. The genetic research suggests that around 9,000 years ago, a new population arrived in South America, leading to a genetic shift distinct from Clovis-associated groups. Unlike North American native groups, modern South Americans show little to no genetic trace of Clovis ancestry, indicating a significant population shift, a complex migration patterns that are still not fully understood. This suggests that a continent-wide population replacement occurred in South America around 9,000 years ago. In their search to find the origins of this mysterious group, several hurdles have prohibited researchers like Reich from getting to the bottom of this puzzle. One is the lack of human remains from South America that are more than 11,000 years old, meaning that they cannot directly probe the initial movements of people into Central and South America. Speaking of the challenges, Reich said, "We lacked ancient data from Amazonia, northern South America, and the Caribbean, and thus cannot determine how individuals in these regions relate to the ones we analyzed." Reich said in the statement, filling in these gaps should be a priority for future work. As we attempt to take in and evaluate the totality of available information centered on the region of the first true Americans, it is clear more research is required to truly solve the mystery. However, researchers are inching closer to their end goal, one that will undoubtedly provide us with a clear picture of the history of the Americas. New studies continue to add to the revelations from the nascent field of ancient DNA that humans were undoubtedly a more restless, wandering, and intermingling species than we could have ever imagined. In the millennia that followed the splintering of the Clovis culture and the mysterious neighbors to the south, the first signs of what would later bloom into distinct tribal cultures began to appear. These Paleo-Indians explored the lush forests, trekked the desert wastelands, climbed mountainous peaks, and explored coastal regions, all while migrating with the seasons. They laid the foundations for cultures to thrive and prosper during the entirety of the Stone Age, making incremental technological and cultural advancements with easy passing generations. The Paleo-Indians boldly went where no human had gone before. What motivated these humans to embark on such a journey into the depths of the unknown is still up for debate. Were they driven further south into the Americas by an exhaustion of local resources or a lack of animals to hunt? This explanation ignores the irrefutable evidence that the virgin continents were abundant in food from all sources, and that such a plethora of sustenance could not be exhausted by such a small population. Eske Willerslev, the prominent researcher from the University of Copenhagen, has proposed that in addition to environmental pressures, early migrants may have been motivated by a drive to explore new lands. While survival needs played a key role, the possibility of curiosity as a factor in human expansion remains an intriguing hypothesis. In time, they would slowly morph into the various distinct cultures of the late Neolithic and Bronze eras, better known as the indigenous groups of the Americas today.